Once upon a time, long, long ago, there was a powerful man who was easy to manipulate when his ego was stroked, and when not being flattered, throw temper tantrums completely out of proportion with the situation. Now, despite this, King Ahasuerus was remarkably successful because he controlled all the land from India to Ethiopia. It was 127 provinces in all. So in the third year of his reign, he decided to throw a big celebration. But not just big. I mean, it was huge. He threw a 6-month-long party for the leaders of those 127 provinces. Yeah, a 6-month-long party. And he brought them to his capital city to show off his riches and his beautiful treasures to prove how great he was. And then, at the end of the 6 months, he threw a banquet that lasted 7 days. And no expense was spared. And the Bible goes into great detail here. The royal palace was draped in white linen curtains. Purple hangings were held up by shining white and red-purple ropes tied to silver rings held up by marble posts. And gold and silver couches sat on a mosaic floor made of gleaming purple crystal, marble, and mother of pearl. And they served wine in cups made of gold, and each cup with its own unique design. And for 7 days, the royal wine flowed, and the king made sure there was plenty. And there was one rule: there's no limits. Give every guest, of course all of them men, give them all as much as they want. And in the meantime, the queen hosted her own celebration for the women of the kingdom, but sadly there's no details given to their decorating choices. No indication of anything more tasteful than gold couches. And on the 7th day, the now well-lubricated king continued to brag about his riches and boast about his beautiful possessions. And he had one more thing he wanted to show off. He was, quote, in high spirits when he called his personal servants, 7 eunuchs, and told them to summon the queen. Queen Vashti was gorgeous, and he wanted everyone to know it. And in truth, he wanted them to compliment him for having such a smoking hot babe as a wife. That one line isn't in Scripture. But you just know that's what he's thinking. And very rationally, of course, right? At the end of a 7-day binge of a 6-month-long party. And so the eunuchs went to the queen and explained that she was to appear before the king wearing a crown. Queen Vashti gave a hard pass. She knew what he meant. Come parade yourself in front of a bunch of men who've been drinking for a week so that I can brag, but not about you, but about me. Me. And wear your crown, which scholars helpfully explain meant wearing only your crown. And she flat out refused. The king boiled with rage. How dare she? He was furious and embarrassed, and gathered his advisors together to discuss the best way to deal with the situation. What should I do to Queen Vashti, since she didn't do as I ordered? And everyone piped in with their ideas, and then MHUCC spoke. He was one of the 7 most important people all the way from Persia to Media. Sir, the queen hasn't just wronged you. She has done wrong against all the officials and all the people in every one of your provinces. I mean, just think about it. When news gets out, all the women of the kingdom will look down on their husbands. They will say the king ordered his servants to bring Queen Vashti before him, but she refused. He can't control her. This very day when the women of Persia and Media hear about what the queen did, they will tell the royal officials the same thing, and there will be no end of put-downs and arguments. And there were a lot of men here listening in on this, nodding their heads. Yeah, he's done wrong to us all. Your Highness the most, of course. But yeah, she's a threat to our way of life. And MHUCC let the men spin out of control and agitate the king, and then he spoke up again and said, so if it pleases the king, send out a royal order and have it written into the laws all across the kingdom, laws that no one can change. And it should say that Vashti will never again come before the king. And it should also say that the king will give her royal palace to someone better than she. And a chorus of chants began, kick her out, kick her out. Now we might ask, why would you need to write that into the law all across the kingdom? Right, it's directed toward one person. It only applies to Vashti. And here's why. He explained, when the order becomes public in every province, all women, rich, poor, and in between, will treat their husbands properly. And everyone turned to the king to see what he would say. I like it. And he sent orders, written orders to every province in their own alphabet and in their own language, and it said, men will decide what happens to women. Actually, no, it says this. Every husband shall rule over his own house, which I'm not sure makes a difference. But as you can see, once upon a time, everything ended happily ever after. So the 6-month party was done. Everyone went home, and after he sobered up, the king's anger lessened. And he thought about his wife and what she had done and what he had done. And I'm not sure you could say he regretted his actions, but he certainly missed her. And as he moped around the palace, his advisors sensed weakness arising and presented him with a plan. What do you think about this? Let us search for the most beautiful young women between India and Ethiopia and bring them back to the royal palace, and then you can choose a new queen from among them. I like it. I mean, what's not to like? Until they explained he would have to wait an entire year. Before they meet you, we will have your chief eunuch provide them with beauty treatments. Get this. 6 months of treatments with pleasant smelling creams, and 6 months with fragrant oils and other treatments. Well lubricated. And the king liked the idea. And they promised him that the one who pleased him the most, which I don't really want to explain, the one who pleased him most would become his next queen. And her story is next week. But all this waiting left him time to think about whether he did the right thing by Vashti. Vashti also had plenty of time to think about whether she had done the right thing for herself. She was banished from the palace. She became a pariah from India to Ethiopia. She lost her crown, her prestige, her privilege. Was it really worth it? Would she do it again? And suddenly this once upon a time story is one that actually deals with real questions that we struggle with even today. Questions like, when is it right to speak up? When is the right time? And when is the right time to remain silent? And what are the costs and consequences, and are we willing to pay them? So how did Vashti decide, this is where I finally draw the line? Because you see, this wasn't a tantrum. This wasn't an act of defiance spontaneously. This was a final enough. And perhaps she asked, as poet and activist Audre Lorde did, what are the tyrannies you swallow day by day and attempt to make your own until you will sicken and die of them, still in silence? Vashti certainly didn't decide to defy an order of the king without having first been pushed to her limit and certainly aware of what would happen to her. But perhaps even more so, aware that all those women at the party and their daughters were watching what she, the queen, would do. And that mattered. That matters. So very few people have heard of Vashti. She's not in the lectionary. You have to take an extra week to tell her story, which I always do because it's so important. Because for most people, she's just a setup, right? She's the prequel to the story of Esther. And for centuries, Vashti's story has simply been told by men that she deserved what happened to her, that she was disobedient, and she got the punishment coming to her. Unfortunately, sentiments are changing a little, at least. But for some, Vashti has even become an icon. And I agree. We need people like her. It's like Dr. Anna Florence Carter said, that it's a funny thing, that we don't have a lot of role models in the Bible for saying no. We tend to think of faith as saying, yes, here I am. What if we recognize that no is just as faithful an answer? Because otherwise, sometimes the tyrannies we swallow day by day might cause us to sicken and die in our silence. What if, for example, we embrace that sometimes it takes no to finally lead us in the direction we should go? Aware of the costs and aware that others are watching, especially our children. And this may in fact be your story. A story for every person, for example, who has had to weigh their job against their self-respect, and choosing between what you're asked to do and what is right to do. And it's a story for every person who has felt their integrity called into question. It's a question sometimes people have to ask of their friendships and relationships, and sometimes there is a point when we must finally ask the question of our marriage, cost and consequence and all. It's also a story where when we are confronted with injustice, right? I mean, movements don't come out of nowhere. It's when enough people have said, enough. And when have you said, and when must we say, can I, should I just go along with what's happening in our country or what is happening in our world or not? And this is actually such a time of reckoning. Do I stay silent? A good time to ask, what would Jesus do? I mean, seriously, what would Jesus do? So Frederick Douglass said, I prefer to be true to myself, even at the hazard of incurring the ridicule of others, rather than to be false and incur my own abhorrence. And Vashti chose self-respect for the purchase price of dignity. Now, the king didn't just order Vashti to come and say hi. to his guests. After trying to dazzle everyone with his riches for 6 months, he had his one last possession to boost his ego, to prove his manhood, and he ordered Vashti to humiliate herself, to put herself on display, wearing only her crown, to walk in front of men who had been drinking for 7 days. Now, our choices are not usually that extreme, maybe not that obvious, but situations that question our integrity and self-respect are not that uncommon. Here is where I draw the line is a faithful decision. And no is a good thing. And should we not also have a here is where I draw the line for how our neighbors are treated too? You know, that whole love your neighbors as you love yourself, Jesus thing requires a no sometimes. That's enough. And so I say, here's to Vashti, a new role model. Just 2,600 years later, but the time had come. She said no. And has that time ever come for you? And is it maybe now?